Welcome to Homeschool Nolan, here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. Yesterday, I took my 11-year-old son to go see the new Reagan movie. I knew going in that he might get bored watching it, but I wanted him to see the movie because I wanted him to know who Reagan was and how many Americans viewed him because he was the president back when I was a kid. I think most people would agree that today, our kids are growing up in very heated times politically. Yes, we've always had Republicans and Democrats going at each other, but we seem more divided than ever. I'm always amazed that whenever I ask older folks who remember the year 1968, they say that even in that year, when we had the Vietnam War, assassinations, and riots across the country, the United States wasn't as politically divided as it is today. Now, us older folks can look at the world today with some perspective, and there's a tendency for us to sometimes look back nostalgically at the times of our youth. Our kids, on the other hand, see the world that we live in today as the only world that they've ever known, and they see both the good and the bad as normal. That's why I wanted my son to see the movie, so he could gain some historical perspective and get a glimpse of what America was like back when I was a kid, and what America possibly could be like again in the future. Now, the movie does portray Reagan quite favorably. I'm not sure if leftists who don't like Reagan will bother to go see it. But regardless of your politics, it's hard to ignore some of the parallels between our times and the world Reagan faced when he took office back in 1981. Back in 1980, we had high inflation, hostages in the Middle East, and Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was known back then, had invaded a neighboring country. On top of that, the United States was engaged in a Cold War with a communist superpower, and the world always seemed on the brink of World War III. I still remember as a kid always feeling a bit anxious about nuclear weapons and wondering if I would ever even survive into adulthood without seeing a nuclear war. But the world completely changed by the time Reagan left office in 1989. In fact, on his last day in office, his national security advisor, Colin Powell, reported to him, quote, "The world is very quiet today." Now, during the movie, at one point, my son asked me, what was the Berlin Wall? When I was growing up, everyone knew what the Berlin Wall was. It was, of course, an ugly barrier that divided East and West Berlin, built by the Soviets to keep people from escaping communism. It was also the site of Reagan's most famous "tear down this wall" speech. But thanks largely to Reagan, there is no Berlin Wall today. But walls do exist, both metaphorically and physically, that divide us, particularly in our politics. And that's the reason why I wanted my son to see the movie, because I wanted him to see an America when both Republicans and Democrats could go at each other during the day, but still remain genuine friends. The movie does a good job in emphasizing the friendship between Reagan, a Republican, and Tip O'Neill, who was a Democrat Speaker of the House. They were adversaries politically, but they were also genuine friends. And there's a touching scene in the movie when Tip O'Neill visits Reagan in the hospital after he's been shot. It's hard to imagine a scene like that today, given today's political climate. In fact, a lot of young people tell me today that they have to be careful when expressing their political views at school, and careful not to show too much support for a particular political candidate. Now, that was unheard of back in my day. When I was in school, I loved to debate politics, but never once did my conservative or liberal friends ever have to worry about being unfriended, canceled, or getting a bad grade simply for expressing the wrong political views. In fact, some of my fondest memories from school were debating politics with my teachers. That's why I think young people today should study the 1980s and the Reagan presidency to give them some perspective on the times they're growing up in today and what this country could be like again in the future. By the way, if you're looking for an online platform to study the 1980s or American history, check out study.com. Study.com has now over 30,000 video lessons and other resources on just about every subject. I use it with my son. We find it a great way to support his homeschooling as well as my own supplemental learning. Use the coupon code HomeschoolNolan and get 30% off the first 3 months. Check out study.com today. Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of the UK during Reagan's presidency, gave a message at his funeral in 2004 in which she said, quote, "We here still move in twilight, but we have one beacon to guide us that he never had. We have his example." Those of us living today can now look back at his example and how he tackled similar problems that we're facing today. Now, Reagan was by no means perfect. The biggest criticism of him I still hear today is that he let the federal budget deficit explode while turning a blind eye to the growing AIDS epidemic of the 1980s. He sure had blind spots, but these blind spots and mistakes of every leader are part of their life and record, and we can learn from them as well. But there's no arguing that the world did change dramatically for the better for most people between the years 1980 and 1989. And in his final address to the nation in 1989, President Reagan reminded us of the importance of teaching American history to our children and warned us that if we don't teach history to our children, it could result in, quote, the eradication of the American memory that could ultimately result in an erosion of the American spirit. Reagan did succeed in lifting the American spirit during his presidency, and that's why I think young people today should still study his presidency and decide for themselves if his words still have relevance today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to click subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.